So thank you. I'm glad to see you here. And thank you to monthly meeting of Friends of Philadelphia for the invitation to be with you and the opportunity in one of your Sunday evening programs to center a program on children in Quaker faith communities. So my name is Melinda Wenner Bradley. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a member of Westchester Meeting. I serve the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. I serve our yearly meeting as the director of program and religious life. And really kind of adjacent to that work, it intersects every once in a while on an evening like this. I am also the director of communication and training for Faith and Play Stories, and a licensed godly play trainer. I'm going to go ahead and begin by putting in the chat some links, and I'll just tell you what they are. And I can put them in again at the end, but it occurred to me to just have them there for you now. I'm breaking my own rules as a former middle school teacher. You never give kids handouts and then try talking to them. So don't go clicking on the links yet. Or do that and then set them aside. The first one is a website for Faith and Play, which we're talking about this evening. The second is a link to, if you are interested and curious to know more after this evening, there are two upcoming conversations happening that are hosted by the Quaker Religious Education Collaborative about this topic and about kind of new growth and directions for it. And if you're really interested after this evening's conversation, Faith and Play Stories is hosting a training for people interested in learning the method for telling the stories we're going to be talking about in May. It'll be actually hosted at my meeting at Westchester Meeting. So that's what's in the chat. Embedded in the invitation to be with you this evening, I heard two queries. And these are what I hope to speak to this evening. And first, we'll do a brief introduction to what we're talking about when we refer to faith and play and godly play. I have a slideshow to walk us through for that kind of context for the conversation. And then I want to come back to the queries. We'll have some time for Q&A and discussion in the second half hour as well. And those queries are, I think I'll put them in the chat as well. Let me do that because it's easier to see them as well as someone sharing them with you. How can Quakers use stories and play, the native languages of children, in religious education for youth and for friends of all ages? And how can Quaker Meetings cultivate a belonging, focused spiritual community of all ages when they use faith and play stories? So how are these stories tools for those things? My favorite phrase is all together now. So how are these stories part of how we are together as a faith community and including all ages? All right, so let me awkwardly, you'd think I'd be so good at this by now, share my screen and pull up that slideshow for you. I've told Lois if it does what it often does to me, which like pauses my share, Lois is going to let me know. All right, do you see a slideshow, friends? Thumbs up? Okay, and that's all you see other than our Zoom screens, I hope. Okay. That is a picture, by the way, of the George Fox story. This was a Chestnut Hill meeting a few years ago, and I invited people to add friends to the story. And so people were added to the story and put in different places. There's those two queries. I've been invoking this quote in a number of places. It is actually a friend who Sally knows well, Sarita Spadoni from Birmingham Meeting. I have Sarita's permission to be sharing this. I just want to lift up for children and for their parents, other adults in the meeting who take an interest in children and their families are so important. This quote from Sarita: I remember well those adult friends who reached out to me all through my growing up years to include me, to value me for me, and to guide me through my early friends' journey in conjunction with the teaching and patterning of my parents have truly shaped who I am as a friend today. Elise Boulding often spoke about the importance of 3 generations being in relationship with each other. My children are now teenagers and young adults, and I know how important for them other adults who are not their parents are for them in meeting. And even when they were younger, that was true. I will say I grew up in Millville, meeting up in Upper Susquehanna Quarter, and I really don't remember our religious education program clearly, but I remember the adults who I knew loved me and the people for whom I was special, and that feeling in the meeting. So for you to be here this evening means you have some care and concern for children in the life of our meeting communities. So thank you. So a little bit of context about what we're talking about. I'm going to use the term godly play and also faith and play this evening. And godly play actually comes first. Godly play is a curriculum that was created by an Episcopalian priest. It sounds like there's some familiarity with Episcopalians amongst some of you, at least among Susanna. And it was created because he at seminary himself as a young man said, there must be another way to do religious education with children. Is there something more experiential that we might explore? He became really interested in the work of Sophia Cavalletti, who was a student of Maria Montessori. He actually went to Italy and studied under Sophia Cavalletti. And through a few different versions and permutations, eventually Godly Play was published. And these are stories. They're stories that are from the Bible and also from Episcopal liturgy. And that this method that he created is the method that we use with our Quaker stories, the faith and play stories as well. And there are elements in this method that resonated for Quakers, including the importance of contemplative silence. Berryman both talks about silence being a story genre and makes a lot of room for silence during the stories being told. Wondering about a story and being open to new truth and new understanding is very much connected to continuing revelation for us as friends. So parts of this method really have connected for us in terms of our faith and practice. And for many people, Godly Play stories, because they are not about packing an answer or a specific set of facts into a child's mind or heart, have been ways that people have come close to the Bible again. People who may have moved away from that as part of their own spiritual life, or not had a positive experience learning about the Bible in a Sunday school kind of setting. The stories are so open that it has created a sense of being able to come close to them again. Children are really given space to use image and language to explore. And that's at the heart. That's one of the things at the heart of this method. So the heart of the Godly Play method that, again, we use with the Quaker faith and play stories, first and foremost, it acknowledges and respects that spiritual life is an active part of who children are from their earliest life, that we don't need to give children a spiritual life, that they have a spiritual life. They may not have language and imagery to describe that, and that's one of the things the stories give them. The Godly Play method creates both. We talk about the rooms that we create and the spaces we make with stories in them are both sacred space and a learning place. It is a place where learning is happening, but it's very much a spiritual community. We explore through the stories religious language, its limits as well as its edges, existential questions, and faith identity. And I'll come back to talking about how faith and play stories, I think, help children grow and think about their identity as friends. Just to say about existential questions, the word play in both Godly Play and faith and play is not about theater. We're not going to a play. It's play as play being the work of children, the important way that children learn and grow. And I'm going to come back to that as well. But those existential questions one of the things they highlight is that it's not play that's always light and fun. Play has some other elements to it as well. And the existential questions we talk about, children being able to come close to through these stories, particularly the ones that are the Bible stories, but some of the faith and play ones as well, are meaning and purpose, and aloneness, and what it feels like to be alone is a very human experience. Freedom, and what does it mean to be free? There's a real tension there for children, including as they get older. And then death, which is something that children know about and have experienced through some way, a pet, a grandparent, a neighbor, something else they've seen or read. So those are four of the kind of big existential questions that exist for us across our human experience. That godly play makes a space for children to explore them through the stories, and they're wondering about them. The method also nurtures, as I said, spiritual community and invites playing with meaning through imagination and wondering. Before I pivot away from godly play, just to say it is something that has grown quite a lot since it was first published. There are 8 volumes, 7 of them are volumes of stories now. Not every Bible story is in the Godly Play collection. Many of them are not. They are told in a slightly different way. But teaching Godly Play is kind of the primer for people who are interested in this method. People sometimes think because Godly Play and Faith and Play use figures and felt and things that are sweet looking, that it's only for elementary or preschool children. It's not. And there's a wonderful new book that expands our thinking about how important the stories are for middle and late childhood. And I would extend that up through adults. It's really embedded in nurture of children's spiritual lives, including at home. And kind of coming back to a question that you asked, Lois, there actually is a book about using godly play with adults. And then it has another branch, which is people using the stories with people who have Alzheimer's and dementia, that the stories are often an anchor for people who have memory loss, that there are things that resonate for them. So there are a number of ways in which this method and those stories are being used in communities. So Faith and Play is a play on the title Faith and Practice. It is a Quaker supplement to Godly Play and to those stories, because Quakers are not going to use the liturgical action lessons that are very much Episcopalian and other church denominations in their orientation. We're not going to use a baptism story or a circle of the Eucharist story. So we created and wrote and have published Faith and Play stories. They're intended for someone who knows and understands the Godly Play method to use them. And play being children's practice, that's how we came up with the name Faith and Play, as a way of deriving from faith and practice. I think ultimately all of the stories in the Faith and Play collection, there's George Fox again. This is one child working with George Fox. I'm not sure what the bride and groom ducks were doing there that day, but they were maybe listening to her tell the story. All of the stories really are about listening. In some way, they are about listening and exploring our identity as friends. So Quakers have been using Godly Play in the U.S. since sometime in the 80s. People became aware of it as a religious education resource. But it was in 2005 at a Godly Play training that was organized by Philadelphia Yearly Meeting that the Quakers there began to say, well, we're not going to use some of these stories, the liturgical ones, but the word liturgy means the work of the people. So what do we have to say is our work as Quakers, as who we are as friends? Are there stories of our faith and practice and our witness in the world that we might tell in this way? So for the last 18 years, we have been writing and testing a lot and publishing and revising the volume that is Faith and Play Stories. This is the second edition that's pictured here. This is actually on the bookshelf. Came across it in London in friend's house, in their bookshop on the shelf with the children's materials. I love the worship kit. I highly recommend that book as well. John Lampin's worship kit is also wonderful. So that's the 2017 second edition which we had revised a number of things for our small group of creators and writers and artists who develop these stories. There is continuing revelation for us as well. And we had been keeping track for a while of things we wanted to change, and we added new stories. And more stories are on the way. We incorporated, we had been part of, in really close relationship with FGC's religious education programming. We very amicably parted ways with FGC and became a 501c3 on our own in the last few years. And we are currently working on a strategic plan looking at next stages and growth for the work. So I'm so young in this picture, so I always enjoy putting it in a slideshow. One of my children's on the floor there. He's now a sophomore in college. So pairing godly play with faith and play, and that's what all those stories are on the shelves behind me. This is a Westchester meeting. Really gives children together a basic knowledge of a set of core biblical stories, and then Quaker faith and practice and the experience and witness of faithful friends in the past. So in the picture, the Old Testament stories are on my right, and the parables that Jesus told are in gold boxes on my left. And those are some of the Quaker stories. There are more now. This is, again, I'm young, but there are more stories now too. And what you can see there is like this busy hum of what is happening in the classroom after a story has been shared. Sharing godly play and faith and play stories is more like spiritual direction than school. So we talk about the adults in the room being mentors, not teachers. As the adult, I don't need to have all the answers. I can be wondering with the children as well when something comes up about a story. And the children here, this is after the story. I still have the stories on the floor in front of me, and they're doing what is their own work time. They're exploring the story some more through art, or they might be working with the story, that they're allowed to take stories off the shelf that they've heard and work with them as well. So a couple more ways that Faith and Play has grown. Faith and Play is a resource for friend schools. There are it's more than 25 friend schools in the United States where I've gone and trained teachers to use the Faith and Play stories with this method. It's a training that's really kind of specific to friend school educators. We don't work with the Bible stories, but we talk about the godly play method. I just did this for 3 schools in the Philadelphia area this fall. Germantown Friends School, Penn Charter, and Friends Central sent teachers, and we had a really lovely time this fall, meeting weekly to talk about stories and how to use them in a school setting to help be part of the Quaker life part and the Quakerism aspects of the school life. Sometimes friend schools use the stories for worship experiences or Quakerism lessons. I go once a month at Westchester Friends School, which is in a care relationship with my meeting, Westchester Meeting. I go once a month and tell a Faith and Play, one of the Quaker stories, to all the classes. I sit on the floor from 8:30 in the morning to noon. It's really hard to get up off the floor after that many hours. And from pre-K through 5th grade, share a story with them. There are more stories in development. And in fact, last month I told the Westchester Friends School students a story that's in development that's about Bayard Rustin that I'm hoping we can share with everybody in the coming year. And they gave me really great feedback about it and had good questions. And they were delighted because Bayard Rustin's grandmother, Julia Rustin, went to Westchester Friends School. So they felt a connection there. So it is, and it's my second year doing this. And so the building of relationship with the students there has been really neat. And to have them know me and know that we're going to have a story. Even the little ones will say, is it a new story? They're very excited. So far, Faith and Play has been translated into Spanish. Jugar Llenos de Fe, playing full of faith is the translation. This happened, like almost 11 years ago, the New England Yearly Meeting, in their close relationship with friends from Cuba and Bolivia, identifying what were some religious education resources that they would like to use, said that this was really what they wanted. And so a couple of us worked with translators in New England to translate the work, and in some cases make some theological changes for friends in a Latin American context. And it is actually a free download. It was through Obadiah Brown's Benevolent Fund that this was funded for friends. But Faith and Play has been making its way around the globe. I'm hopeful that Swahili might be the next translation. Friends are curious and interested for this work there. There have been workshops and trainings. I am not a Spanish speaker, but there is another Quaker who lives on the West Coast, who is a native Spanish speaker and is the other Quaker godly play trainer in the world, in the US and the world. And so she has done workshops and trainings in Cuba and El Salvador, Honduras, Peru, and Bolivia. And then I've done some work in England. Was really fortunate to be able to travel to Kenya, where there were also friends from Uganda and Tanzania who were there, and where we did some preliminary work with the stories, partly in a hope that friends in East Africa would use this method to capture some of the stories of early friends there, and their stories that might be told in this way. And I'll pause to say that when we went to Kenya, it was held at Friends Theological College, and there was some concern on our part about how things like wondering would be, this open, continuing revelation might be experienced in a much more evangelical, somewhat more conservative theologically setting. And there was no concern. Friends wondered deeply about stories, sometimes for much longer than we had planned on a schedule. I was there with Beth Kalea from New England Yearly Meeting, who's pictured there in the apricot orange outfit. We were there for a conference for Sunday school teachers from all over East Africa. And we found that friends really connected with the idea of wondering and thinking about the stories in this way. And one of the most powerful moments at FTC during those 2 weeks was when Dr. Robert Wafula, who's the president of the seminary, we were in chapel. And I think I had told the story, Jesus and the Children, which is sort of an adjacent story. It's not part of the Faith and Play or Godly Play connection. It's a set of Jesus stories for Quakers that exists, that we share with people. And because it was chapel that morning, all of the pastors in training were in the room. So a lot of the Sunday school conference were women, not all, but many. And then there are a lot of young men who are pastors in training in East Africa. And at the end of the story and the wondering, which went on for quite a while about the story together, and these are questions like, I wonder what part of the story you liked best. I wonder what part of the story felt most important for you today. I wonder where you are in the story. What part felt like it was about you? Dr. Wafula stood up and said to the pastors, quite clearly to them, he said, this is where your work begins. When you go to lead a church, a Quaker church, this is where your work begins, is with the children. And it was a really powerful moment that has stayed with me there in that context. And then last summer, I was really fortunate to be invited by New Zealand friends, New Zealand Yearly Meeting, to travel there and to do a training for friends from New Zealand and Australia I was just emailing with them earlier today about book lists. And my 16-year-old son came with me. He got a travel and witness grant from Philadelphia Yearly Meeting to be able to join me. It was quite an adventure together. We traveled from the North Island through down into the South Island and did other programs and storytelling workshops on the way. So it is something that is kind of making its way through the generosity of friends and their interest in it around the world. And there have been trainings across the United States as well. So these are some other, I can send this slide to Lois, but these are some other links that might be of interest. Again, I put the website in the chat before. If you want to go see what a Faith and Play story looks like, there is a Faith and Play channel on YouTube. There's a Facebook and an Instagram page. Quaker Books of FGC is Quaker Press is our publisher, and they sell both the book and Godly Play books and materials on the Quaker Books website as well. So there's a couple more things I want to share about Faith and Play before we open up to having some questions and answers and conversation together. One of the reasons why I feel really passionately about this work is because the traditional language of religious education often includes the word school. Sunday school, for Episcopalians, church school, and other places, first day school. And this has its roots in the Sunday school movement of the 19th century. And it was really indeed about providing children with schooling who might not have it otherwise. But as an experiential faith, I am interested in friends exploring what kinds of resources there are for a model of spiritual formation that leaves room for both experiential learning and the generative work of play. So again, why do we talk so much about play with this? The call from Piaget and Montessori that play is the work of the child is taken up in the work of Godly Play and Faith and Play. And because of the Montessori roots of this approach, play is deeply valued as something that children do. They typically engage in play, which we call their work, after hearing a story and wondering about it in the community of the circle of children and the storyteller together. So following hearing a story and wondering about it together, we'll ask the children, I wonder what your work will be today. And by calling that time that they're using to respond to the story their work, we're respectfully making space for children to engage with the stories through play or using art materials that they might continue to explore the story they just heard. I don't know how often you've heard this, but I've frequently heard people say about children, oh, they're just playing, in all kinds of places and contexts. Oh, they're just playing. But children's play is how they try on ideas and gain new skills and practices. So in Godly Play and Faith and Play, we believe that play is voluntary and done for itself. It is absorbing. I remember when I was trying to potty train my first of my 3 children, she would say to me so indignantly after she'd had an accident, but I was playing. Like I was completely engrossed in my play and I don't have time for other things. So it's absorbing. It's connected with creativity. It's a way to learn language. It's a way to learn about our social roles. And it engages as such in problem solving. So there's also a wonderfulness in the wondering that we do, a playfulness rather, in the wondering that we do after a story. We will wonder with the children in a playful way if there's any part of the story that we could take out and still have everything we need. And a child will suggest that we might remove a piece of the materials in the story, and I'll actually do that. But then another child will protest and explain why they need that in the story. And so we might rearrange the whole story as we consider what it meant and how we receive those words. So it's playful, but it's also meaning making. And when the children are absorbed in wondering about a story and how it connected to them, they are often, without knowing it, using spiritual or religious language and exploring their own spiritual lives. There's problem solving, there's laughter, and often the children are supporting each other. So the children are part of a community, in a first day program or a children's meeting space. And they also come to understand, if we're using these stories in a broader context, how they're part of the whole meeting. So this goes back to thinking about those queries we lifted up. So creating spaces for children to be in spiritual community together, as we do in their own children's program. At my meeting, we call it children's meeting instead of first day school, partly to move away from that scholastic language that I don't think has really invited a lot of people into joining us. I don't think it has been a draw in that way. And it can be confusing. What do we mean by first day school? So we call it children's meeting. And by creating spaces for children to be in their own spiritual community, guided by adult mentors, we're noting how important they are as part of the whole. I sometimes invoke the big table of, like at a Thanksgiving meal, the adults may sit at a table and there may be a children's table, but that the children at the children's table know they will eventually be the adults at the big table. It's important that there's some reciprocity between them. And one of the places that happens is if we try intergenerational worship. Coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that has felt true is that it is challenging sometimes for children and parents to separate from each other. And intergenerational worship says we don't need to, that once a quarter or once a month, whatever feels like it's doable for a meeting, that we might seek to be all together. And I've been visiting a number of meetings. A number of meetings in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting have been trying all together worship. So the children are staying for the entire time of worship with the body. There are ways to get ready for that and materials to have on hand. Intergenerational doesn't mean the same thing as multi-generational. Multi-generational simply means they're different ages together. We're multi-generational this evening here on Zoom. To me, intergenerational means everything is for everybody. So if a child would like to share something that's vocal ministry, if an adult would like to come and get a coloring mandala and some crayons or some pipe cleaners, that everything is for everyone in that space. And we often, in my meeting and in other meetings, begin that time with a faith and play story as a way to ground the time and to make worship a place that welcomes story and exploring its meaning through quiet play or reflection. So the last thing I'll say again here is play and story are the native languages of children. That's one of the things that we talk about in this method, and I think it's true. So where do we make space for that in Quaker worship? And I really mean that question. Where do we make space in Quaker worship for play and story? And if those are the native languages of children, and if we're not speaking those languages at all, and how and when we gather as friends, how do children experience meeting for worship as being a place where they belong and are welcome? So there's going to be more to come about intergenerational worship from PYM. I'll put my PYM hat back on. Stay tuned, more conversation to happen among us in our meetings about that practice. But that is what I wanted to share this evening, and I'm happy for us to have a conversation or answer questions until we get to the top of the hour.
Melinda, could you please tell us a story?
Well, we can see if we have time. They take like 10 to 15 or 20 minutes. I don't know that we have time, but I can put, and I'm not really set up to do that here at my desk, but I can put a link in the chat to a story on the YouTube channel that friends might go and watch after this evening. I'd be glad to do that.
I I have two questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
The first question I have is music. Is music ever used for faith and play?
Thanks for that question. I also just refreshed the links in the chat that I'd shared at the beginning of our time for people who have joined us since then. I have, so there is a time after we have a story session has a certain rhythm to it that I actually think is much like meeting for worship in a way. It's not meant to mimic meeting for worship, but there's a way in which it has the same kind of rhythm. The children gather and cross some kind of a threshold into the space where a story is going to be told. And there is an adult who is, we call them the door person, who it's like being the greeter at meeting for worship, right? So somebody who shakes their hand and asks them, "Are you ready?" And that's such a big question. I would have been so much better behaved in staff meetings when I worked at friends' schools if someone had asked me if I was ready before I went into staff meeting. And so children have an opportunity to decide, are they ready? And to get ready to come in. We gather and greet, we hear the story, we wonder about it. And sometimes that next part, Tom, has the opportunity for music to be part of what we share together. Sometimes if we've heard like the George Fox story, a shared piece of what we might do together is just to sing the George Fox song, to learn that. So it's not part of the method itself, but there definitely are places where song or singing might be a communal part of our work together and our time together. I also had a group of children who, for like 1 year at Westchester, this was a long time ago, they made up a little song they wanted to sing to get ready. It was like their getting ready song. And they made hand motions and it was a little song, but it was their thing that we did before stories that helped them to settle, and they had a lot of ownership of. So does that help? Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. And incidentally, the reason I asked that question is because I grew up in Salem Meeting in South Jersey, and I was a member as a child, of a first day school class, and there were active adult and middle range high school first day school classes. And before meeting for worship, at the end of all first day schools, all the classes, including the very young class, would gather together and sing hymns. And my sister was the piano player. And then we would proceed into meeting for worship. And when I was too young, my sister would take me home. And when I was older, she would keep me in meeting for worship. So that music was a way for intergenerational participation. And Salem was not a new meeting. It was a very old meeting and always a part of Philadelphia yearly meeting. Mm-hmm. But that was the practice, and that's why I asked about music. Now, I have a second question, which I'll squeeze in, and then I'll retire from the field. And that is, do you know if the faith and play varies in geographic areas in the United States? For example, I'll give you an example. For example, on the West Coast, because in my experience in Southern New Jersey as part of Philadelphia yearly meeting, when we had first day school as young children, we only really heard about the Old Testament stories. I don't quite know why. And I'm guessing that if someone grew up in Quakerism on the West Coast or in the Midwest, they might be told New Testament stories? I don't know. That's my question.
Yeah, I am lost track of how many states I've been among friends and done trainings in, but there definitely is, different regions, different yearly meetings. We have not done as much work with FUM meetings as we have with FGC meetings. But often, I don't go and do a training only to use the Faith and Play Quaker stories. The training includes both the godly play stories from the Bible, which have both Old Testament and parables, specifically parables that Jesus told. But I know that there are meetings where they are using more of one or the other, or they're more comfortable with parables. It often depends really around the theology and the theological focus of the meeting itself. I mean, we know Friends
Yeah.
meetings, it's herding cats with us, and there's different meetings have different senses of that. I think one of the things that is about godly play that's true is because it approaches stories from the Bible in a way that's really about continuing revelation and about an openness, that I think that for people who are like, yeah, we're never going to use Bible stories in our children's program, it's created an opening and a possibility. But I know that there are probably meetings where I've gone and we've done the training, and they may choose to only use Faith and Play stories and not use any of the Bible stories, and that's for them to discern as a meeting together. And I hope they have that conversation together about that. But you're right, our theology does vary. I was in Portland, Oregon in the fall and did a training for a number of meetings there. And, I'm sure there are going to be differences between, the ones that are more, there was one that's a real Friends church and is semi-programmed. So our differences come out in these ways too. So thanks for that question. I see another hand. I am also I want you to know, so I'm not telling you this or doing it while anyone else is talking. I'm putting in the chat a link to the Margaret Fell story that's on the YouTube channel. I told this recently. I did an introduction for Quakers in Lancaster, England, and they had emailed me, and I was like, "Oh, friends, you're just down the road from me. Like, they're like, "Oh, no, we're in England." We're like the original Lancaster. So I showed them this story and I was like, is it historically? They're like, oh, it's fine. It's historically accurate enough. You're fine. I was like, oh no, why did I show them one about an English Quaker? That was silly. So it's in there if you would like to copy that URL. Tim, I saw your hand. I'm sorry.
Yeah. When I was in 5th grade in Friends Select, we used to go away for these weekends. That's in Philadelphia. We used to go away to these weekend, maybe it's just a one-night sleepover in South Jersey at these different Quaker places and play games and share stuff, and that always reminded me that when my parents raised me, we were always going. This was founded in 1940. This ECRS, Eastern Cooperative Recreation School.
Oh wow!
And that's all they do is meet for recreation. I like rhyming that word. But so anyway, ECRS, and they still have these meetings. They're cooperative. Yeah, pay a little bit just to get in there. So we keep going to that here and there. Just maybe it used to be 4 times, 5 times a year. Now it's just 3 times, but they're still going. And so yeah, there's children and adults and dancing and games. And so anyway, I just had to mention that just because I really did not remember that Friends Select School weekend thing until somebody else mentioned that. And then I remembered this. So I'm just sharing things that are really meaningful to me because I grew up, my parents were leading dancing and games and singing and stories and acting. So I was a little kid. So anyway, just sharing what was really meaningful to me.
Thank you for sharing that. I get emails from ECRS at my job at Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. I think they are super cool. Yeah, their thing is like learning through play. I'm going to put in the chat for everybody the link to their website. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. What a great connection to make. Thank you. Any other questions that came up? And I'm not going to put you on the spot, Sally Jones, but Sally Jones is a godly play, faith and play storyteller. And I don't know, Sally, you want to add anything from your experience, in addition to any questions friends might want to bring up. I
Yep.
just saw your hand.
No worries. I just wanted to mention regarding the music aspect. When I've seen Godly Play used at Hearn and Friends meeting, many of the teachers will choose to have music on during the work.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's a nice non-intrusive way to just set a mood. And I know some of them really put some thought into what they choose and how it relates to the story. So I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. That's nice to lift that up. Yeah. It can be challenging when we have, 45 minutes for a religious education program time, to feel like we have enough spaciousness for that work time, which is their exploration and play. Sometimes I will we'll have a Sunday that's just doing that, and that would be a great time to do that and to have music in the background as well. The other thing is, it's Godly Play or Faith and Play, or the two of them together, are not a whole religious education program. There are other things we do in our meetings, whether it's a Christmas pageant or times when we sing together. And actually, another piece with music, unrelated to the stories, is at my meeting when we have intergenerational worship, a couple times a year, we open intergenerational worship with singing together, which speaks to that, that piece Tom was describing about, singing with everyone and being all together to do that, the intergenerational aspect of that. We were just planning for that this morning at our meeting for business. So yeah, finding those times and places where we can either have music as part of the program or that we come together to do that singing. I mean, there are stories in all those songs as well, right? The songs tell stories.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Are you seeing any trends post-COVID of the number of children in meetings, or the way the makeup of the population is right now?
Yeah, that's I have heard a number of stories that are very heartening about meetings where more families are coming, and families with children. However, I will also say that there has been, for about a year or maybe two, I see your hand too, Sally, yay. There has been a lot of conversation in children's ministry across denominations, with articles being published that have titles like "Where Are Children?" or "Will Families Come Back?" And it's kind of a good moment for us to be thinking about, well, what are we offering and how are we welcoming? Which is why I think in some places intergenerational worship speaks to one of the COVID outcomes, which is children being less comfortable separating from parents in new places right away. It is something for us to be doing some ongoing thinking about. I mean, we're not post-COVID, but we're not really we're a little bit still in a threshold, liminal doorway where we have an opportunity to think about how we're welcoming. And one of the things I remind friends of is that in our seeking to welcome children, we need to remember that we're welcoming their parents and caregivers. Children don't drive themselves to meeting, thank goodness. So thinking about how are we extending our welcome to adults in their 20s, 30s, 40s, people who are parenting, really making sure that they feel a strong sense of welcome, that they will come when they feel that and bring their children with them. So what we're offering in terms of children's programming is important, but also how are we welcoming those parents and caregivers? Thank you for that question. I think it's something that's been heavy on a lot of people's minds. And if you don't know the Quaker Religious Education Collaborative, QREC, that is a grassroots network of Quakers who care about religious education from children through adults. I'll put the I'll put the website in the chat while Sally's sharing. And they host conversation circles. And there have been some recent conversation circles about welcome for children and families in this time that you can go to their website and find the notes from the conversation too. So thanks for bringing that up. It really is a big piece of what people are holding in their hearts and as meetings. Sally,
Thanks, Melinda. I'm sorry I couldn't respond when you called on me before. I don't usually attend Zoom meetings with my phone, and I don't know, I did something to my screen and lost everything. So I apologize, but I'm back. I just wanted to encourage Friends at the Monthly Meeting of Philadelphia to perhaps send a couple of people to attend the QREC conversation circles. Have 2 people come so you can talk to each other and compare afterwards, and to send perhaps a person or two to the Playing in the Light training that will be coming up in May. I did that during the pandemic. We started at Pendle Hill, and then we've had to finish about a year later when we thought we were doing it just consecutive months. But it was so valuable to sit in a room with people from many different meetings, compare notes with each other about what was happening in our meetings and what our hopes were, and to kind of hear the background and get a foundation about these stories, and then to actually hear some stories and practice them ourselves, and share the stories with each other. That was such a positive experience for me. And in my meeting at Birmingham in Westchester, Pennsylvania, we sprinkle throughout the year godly play and faith and play stories. And the children really like them a lot. They get very excited when they see that set out on the floor. But we use the same concept every week, whether or not we're having a godly play or faith and play story. We make a circle and we consider it our children's meeting. And we have certain sort of rules about being ready. And if a child that day isn't really, into what we're doing in our story, they're invited to go play in the nursery area with some toys. But the idea is that the circle is where they want to be, and we encourage them to come back. So there's a lot about the philosophy that can be applied to whatever is happening in your children's program. And I was curious to come and see the presentation tonight. I was hoping, because I'm trying to get another member of our meeting involved and interested and come to the training in May, and something must have happened and she was unable to come. But I'm a person who's been following this and been involved with it for a number of years now, and I can't recommend it highly enough.
Thank you, Sally. I didn't slip Sally chocolate or anything to have her say that. And I appreciate you lifting up that there is, even if you're not using these stories or this particular material every week, it does create a scaffolding for, as Sally is saying, for children having an understanding and an expectation of what's going to happen when they come to the children's program at meeting. One of the things that creates safety and security and comfort for children, that therefore helps them feel welcome, is knowing what to expect. And so even if you're not using, you can actually read a wonderful children's picture book, and then use those wondering questions after the picture book. So there are tools that are part of this that then have further application. I sometimes describe that the godly play method and godly play and faith and play stories have permeated every part of my life. That it's like when you go to the beach and you come home and there's sand in everything, and there's sand in the bag you didn't even take out of the car. How is there sand in that bag? That's what this has become like for me. I mean, it has impacted my parenting and my classroom teaching when I was still a classroom teacher, my work with adults as well as with children. So it is something that has lots of different tools for us to find and take away. And sometimes people come to trainings who are like, I am never going to tell a story. I'm not the person who's going to sit on the floor and do this, but they come for their own spiritual nurture. The training weekend is spiritual nurture. Or they say, I'm coming for me and